Hello everyone, this is David Luscombe, and today I'm going to go over another variation of the Bhuiyan variation of the London opening system, my chess secrets for you guys. So here, white plays d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, bishop f4, h6, and we have analyzed this in the previous videos. So if you haven't seen them, go ahead and go back and watch the first video, because I'm going to go through this a little bit fast. So knight h5 and then bishop e5. Now, in the other variations, we saw that the pawn moved out to e6. And we saw what happened after that. But what happens instead if bishop out to g4? Because in the other variations, after e6, this bishop was not a participator in the game and black just got completely crushed. So what if black just moves that bishop out, so that way it does not get locked inside of the pawn chain? Well, I mean, it's a good idea, but unfortunately it actually loses on the spot. Now, it's very hard to see that at first because it looks like a normal move. I mean, you're developing your bishop, you're pinning the knight. What could possibly be wrong about this? Well, white should play h3, and bishop takes f3 is the main line. But what happens if the bishop moves back to d7? Well, retreating the bishop just costs time and makes it incredibly passive. So the game could continue like c4, e6, pawn captures, and queen b3, and here all of a sudden white is already winning a pawn. So if black does not take here on so let's see. Okay, so if c4 and instead so if e6. Okay, yes. So if c4 and instead of e6, if black were to play pawn takes, then we would have knight takes, then e6, a3, and knight takes on e5, then pawn captures. And here, in the words of Bobby Fischer, black does not have air for his pieces. His pieces are not coordinated, they don't have breathing room, and this knight is almost trapped. g4 is a legitimate threat, simply to win the knight. So after a move like g6, well, then the knight and the bishop are both competing for the g7 square. So this is simply not good for black. He's going to lose a lot of time on that knight. Essentially, this knight will go to here. Actually, no, it goes to here. It goes to here. Then it goes back to g7. Then it would have to go out to f5. So the knight would move all the way around the board like that. And that's just way, way too much. Yeah, the knight shouldn't be moving around that much. And it really can't even get out to f5 if g4 is played. Okay, so here, instead of knight takes on e5, which is bad, why not just bishop out to e7? Well, then bishop h2, castles, and bishop out to d3, and we can see that white has a significant advantage in space, and black's knight on h5 is way out of play, and moved out here to try and get rid of the bishop, but it didn't do it. So the knight is going to move here to here. Oops, not there. It's going to move to here, then it's going to move all the way back to f6, and that just costs too much time. Not to mention this bishop is very passive, and e5 can't even be played. So, yeah, that's incredibly bad. So therefore white would have an advantage there. Okay, so let's go back to the main line. So we looked at h3 and bishop d7. We looked at h3, bishop d7, and c4, and e6. And then we looked at c4 and d takes c4. So those were the variations that we just looked at. So let's go back to 7h3. So bishop takes on f3 is the very best move. Then queen takes, and the queen's just hitting the knight, so black is going to lose a tempo, and then white just captures that knight, which is pretty shocking, and then plays c4. So there's some different variations here. e6 is best to defend it. Yeah, I mean, if pawn takes, then white would simply play bishop takes back, and would be up in development, or would have 3 pieces developed, and black would only have 1. So, taking right here is just not very good. and it also gives up the center for black, and there's ideas of bishop out to d5 or bishop out to b5 followed by rook out to c1. So therefore black really doesn't want to take on d5 and activate white's bishop. So therefore we see a move like e6, but then white just captures. And here if the pawn captures back, then after a3, white has a significant advantage here because of black's pawn structure. And how can black castle? You know, if the bishop moves out and the king castles this way, then there's always bishop out to d3 and queen f5. Let me show that real fast. So if something like this were to happen, then yeah, this is just going to be really, really bad for black. White is completely dominating on the light colored squares. And if black decides not to castle to the king's side, but instead tries to castle to the queen's side, then this could run into something like bishop out to f5. And if the queen comes out here instead, then white can simply occupy this square, and it's very, very difficult for black to castle. And there's other ideas for white as well in that position. I mean, getting into a queen getting into like an endgame with the queens off the board would certainly be advantageous for white because of black's pawn structure. Okay, so therefore we see c4, we see e6, we see pawn takes, and we saw pawn takes back, but what about queen takes? Well, then that simply drops the pawn on f6, and white is just completely winning there as well. So this is the Bhuiyan variation. It's a side line, it's not the main line, but it is the bishop out to g4 line in order to avoid having the bishop entombed inside of its own pawn structure. So bishop out to g4 is a decent idea, but in this position it just backfires. It's not very good. So, well, I thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.